Hi, Melissa.
Hello.
So excited to chat with you tonight. You're excited about your release?
Yes, I am. That video was amazing.
I know. I was entranced for a second. I was like, whoa, this is really
It's so
gorgeous.
cinematic.
I know. It's beautiful. Well, before we get started, while everyone's kind of logging in, I'm going to do some introductions and then we'll get to some fun questions. So I'm Juliette Cross. I'm a multi-published author of fantasy and paranormal romance. I'm a native of Louisiana, where I live with my husband and four children and a menagerie of animals. My love of New Orleans inspired my the setting for my best-selling series, the Stay a Spell series, which is about six witch sisters who live in New Orleans and meet their paranormal loves. I'm also the co-host of the podcast Smart Women Read Romance, where my niece and I just fangirl over all the books that we love. We just review the books that we absolutely love in romance. And
That sounds
so Oh, thank you. I'm going to introduce Melissa to everyone. Melissa Blair is an Anishinaabe of mixed ancestry living in Turtle Island and the author of A Broken Blade, the first book in the Halfling Saga. She splits her time between Treaty 9 in Northern Ontario and the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe in Ottawa, Canada. She has a graduate degree in applied linguistics and discourse studies, loves movies, and hates spoons. Very interesting. Melissa has a book talk account, which is at melissas.bookshelf on TikTok, if you're not following her yet, where she discusses and reviews her favorite books, including Indigenous and queer fiction, sapphic books, LGBTQ plus romance, feminist literature, and nonfiction. Busy, busy woman.
yeah, it's been a time. I'm laughing at the laugh reactions. I think that's from the I hate spoons,
I
but
know, like, there has to be a story behind that, and we're gonna have to get to it at some point tonight because that's just too intriguing. All right, so I'm gonna hit with you with a tough question first, of course. There are a lot of spicy scenes in a vicious game, which I'm sure the readers love. How do you go about constructing these scenes?
um I know some people know this because I've talked about it on live and stuff, but I actually leave those scenes to the very end.
No way.
My editor Laura will know this. Too bad she couldn't jump on to say, but I often submit my first pass pages with a
With a
blank
big
chapter.
blank? Oh my
Like,
gosh.
I'll figure this out once I get the rest of the story done.
And
I
the
have a hard
editors.
time with those scenes. They're my least favorite scenes to write. So I really like to have everything settled with the character arc to figure
Mhm.
out exactly like what kind of emotional arc or like
Right,
transgression has to happen during that scene, and then
right.
the very last scenes I write every time. I've
Yeah.
done 5 now, and
So I
this
don't
is
cheat like you. That is cheating. I mean, but I also understand it because for me it's the same way. I can be just like trucking along, but as soon as I get to the sex scenes, I come to like a dead halt. It's like I'll go from getting all the words to no words and I'm staring at the page trying to figure out, like you said, it's kind of a balance, right? Because you're trying to figure out what are their emotions here? What kind of sex scene is this? Because sometimes it's more intense and sometimes you need slow and soft and it depends on their emotional state. So very interesting. You're one of those that blocks it. Your editor must just be like livid because they're all excited reading your book and then they have to stop and they don't get the good
yeah, I
juicy
mean,
part.
I think she caught on after, like, the 3rd manuscript with the exact same
She's like,
thing.
okay, I got it. I
I'll
got
get
it.
to this after. I only have enough energy and ability to
Yeah.
do it once. I can't write and rewrite and edit this, so
Yes. So
get
you
it.
do it on your second pass? You just write them all at once, like when you get your second edit? I'm just curious, like
I
as
had
a writer.
written scenes at the copy edit stage, I'm not gonna lie.
Ah, very
Those were
interesting.
specific scenes. Like, sometimes if there's, like, lead up in a scene,
Mhm.
it'll be there, or it'll exist, but in a very, like, skeletonized, "This is what happens where, here are the locations."
Right, very mechanical.
Yeah. And then
This scene's
I'll get
here.
it
Yeah.
after. after the edits are done.
Wow, okay. I actually wanna read those, the skeleton ones, that would be very funny.
They're very funny. They're like a who's written them.
Okay, all right, that is awesome. Here's another good one I really like. Kira has come a long way over the course of the series, but she starts a vicious game stuck back in a dark place. Why did you choose to bring Kira back to this emotional space? And what do you think drives her to pick herself back up?
Yeah, I like that question. I mean, I mapped out I'm a big plotter, so I
Mhm.
have known what is happening
For a long
for
time.
yeah, Shadow Crown was a little rough for me, so this isn't too applicable to the second book, but for the rest of the books, I have known kind of exactly what the beats were and what was going to happen,
Right.
and one of the inspirations behind Kira's character was that I really didn't like the kind of the tropification of alcoholism or addiction in fantasy,
Oh,
um,
wow. Yeah.
and sometimes in fantasy romance where it's, like, meant to be used sometimes in one book or half of a book to show, a character's low mental state, but it's never really a problem, and it's not something that's part of their foundational character, the
Right.
way I've come to understand addiction in my own life.
Mhm.
So, I always knew that Kira was gonna struggle with it throughout the entire saga, and
Mhm.
that we were going to have active relapses on the page. So I've always known that that was gonna be a part of the start for book
Right.
3, and that you were going to see her recover in different ways. Because I think when Kira is able to kind of put the booze aside the first time, it's really, like, externally motivated, she's trying to protect
Mhm.
other people. I think this is the book, and then the 4th book as well, where she is really actually taking on the task of healing internally and
Right.
maybe hoping for something other than a war killing her. So,
Yeah.
that was my idea with this book.
Deep, but lots of layers, and I love that, you know? I mean, lots of
Yeah,
internal
she's a
struggle.
complicated woman, Kira.
I know, well, but I think it's perfect though, because to me, like, the best stories, fantasy or otherwise, or contemporary, whatever, have these layers to them that the struggle's not just external, there's definitely internal struggle going on, and
Mhm.
I think that's awesome, that you attack that. Okay, let's see. This is a cast of characters made up of found families, which I love, by the way. Found families is one of my favorite. Why do you think depicting found family is so important?
Ooh, I mean, short answer, I think I'm just drawn to it.
Me too.
Longer answer on why I think I'm drawn to it is, I think it's really important for queer people and for marginalized people, especially who have to be, um, displaced from their
Mm,
family for whatever reason, whether that is, like, in my case, where, like, I can't access education and, like, a lot of the things that I need to pursue my career where my family originally is from.
right.
So you have to live apart from them, you know? I think it's something that a lot of like other indigenous people from the world experience in their homeland or having to move and immigrate, and that separation that happens. I mean, Kira experiences it to the extreme,
Mhm.
um, push it to the extreme. But I think that found family and that safety net when your family isn't accessible to you or unfortunately is no longer around is
Mhm.
a really important thing. And then I try to weave in also this element of like chosen family, like from the
Oh, I
queer
like that.
community.
Yeah.
Yeah, of trying to show how important it is to choose people who are there for you. Even in the case with Kira, as the books go on, where you see the people that she ends up choosing might be people that the king has set up to be her opponents her entire life, and then she has to
Mhm.
go and that's just a really fun thing to play with creatively, but that was the inspiration behind mapping that out in Kira's arc and then the other characters'
I love
arcs.
that. And I love that idea of chosen family too, you know? That's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
that's
I
special.
I kind of feel like I'll write that into a lot of different books. It's just so fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Many of the characters have grappled with grief throughout this series, especially in this book. Why was centering the experience of grief so important to the story for you?
Ooh, um, I mean, a big inspiration for the Halfling Saga was like to center colonization at the
Hmm.
side of it because the inspiration came from reading so many books in the genre that kind of didn't address it at all, but it was foundationally part of the world buildings in these books, and it was kind of uncomfortable as an Indigenous reader to read again and again and again.
Right.
Um, and to me, I mean, I can only speak from the Indigenous experience, but I've heard so many other people from different marginalized identities speak to this as well. I don't know anyone who is actively fighting for their people that doesn't have to do that through layers of grief all of the time. I think
Hmm.
that's just part of our realities is, because of oppression and because of how the systems are set up. You lose more people, you have a harder time. People can be actively, like in Kira's case, it's not too gross of an exaggeration to say that people can be actively taken from you, whether that be through like
Right.
the carceral system or from being
Hmm.
killed or whatever it is. So for me, I was just trying to be as honest as I could be in my exploration of like what this rebellion would be while centering colonization, and that just comes with a lot of grief. And then the other side of it too was I really don't like when characters have like these really important relationships in books and then the love interest is just forgotten about when they die.
Oh
So
gosh.
that was like an anchoring part of Kira's character was that you're going to uncover this relationship that you never actually see on the page.
Hmm.
Yeah, but it's vital to who she is, and it's such an important part of like her decision making process and what she wants to do and how she's gone about forming her life and then relationships or lack thereof that she has, and how you see that shift and change as she continues to heal. So
Hmm.
those are the two inspirations.
I think that's what's really cool also about the fantasy genre is that it allows you to tackle some of these issues without, point blank saying, look at what's going on in our real world, but it is, in a way, just sharing that difficult part of the real world through this fantasy world. And I think you do a really good job of that.
Cool.
So, kudos to you. Um, let's see. Much of this installment is about defining freedom. Why is it so difficult for characters like Kira and others that previously lived under the king to define freedom?
Hmm. Um, yeah, this goes to another thing. Like when I was building out the world, it's so
Hmm.
funny. You're a plotter. You can really tell when you talk about it because like these decisions were made years ago. Um,
Right.
but when I was building out the world, I was really interested in like the pathway of like reconciliation with
Hmm.
these people, both for Kira individually, which starts to happen in book one, but then with the Elverin as a whole as the story progresses.
Right.
And I really want to show, and I was really interested in kind of playing around with the idea of how different is it to explore what freedom means between characters who have actually seen their people living and thriving before this contact has happened, and they know
Mhm.
that it exists and they know what's possible, compared to people like Hira or Gerarda or any of the other shades and halflings who can't even imagine that. Like it's Kira's struggling even in the third book to kind of grasp what that can be because to her it's just always been impossible and she
Right.
can't grasp it, and how differently they go about defining what they want. Like I think Kira would define freedom as having the boot taken off of her neck,
Oh,
where
yeah.
it's an entirely different perspective compared to Farron or Sierra, who have like lived thousands and thousands of years in their culture, thriving, who would just see it really differently. And then
Right.
they play off of each other in different ways because of that.
That's awesome. I love that. Okay, we're going to move into some of the we had some attendees send in some questions and I see we do have a couple of Q&A in our box, but I'm going to start with some of the ones that were already sent in and then I'll try to get to some of those that are asking questions live for us right now as well. So one is, what is your favorite quote from this series so far? And this was by Tori Stanley. Do you have that ready?
I looked it up and now I'm gonna forget what I wrote. I have 2. I really like, I like in the first book, the scene where Sierra is talking to Kira and the "A broken blade can be mended" quote, and
Oh
that
yeah.
entire paragraph I really like. And then I think it's in book 3. I'm pretty sure it's in book 3, but there is a quote that I think comes from Sierra too. Apparently, I just like her dialogue.
You like to
And
give her all the good stuff, right?
yeah, and it's, just because the forest burns, the earth remembers, talking about, like,
Oh,
vitalization of culture, and I really like that quote. That was one where I wrote it, and I was like, "That sting in the book."
that no one
I
is
don't
cutting
feel like
this,
the other ones
darling, you
yeah,
know?
it was, like, highlighted in my version, like, "This stays."
Oh, yeah, that
Yeah.
is awesome. I always think about that, have you ever heard that quote by Stephen King? Like, sometimes you have to just cut out all your darlings, like your darling lines, and I'm like, sometimes you've gotta keep them, right? That was definitely a keeper.
Yes, I definitely it doesn't happen very often. I can be pretty aggressive making cuts,
Yeah.
but there's
Yeah, me
always a
too.
couple where I'm like, "I will rework this if you
Like, "This
decide
has
to."
been living in my head too long, please don't take it from me."
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. Okay, let's see. We have one from Olivia Jenkins, and she asked, "How early did you realize the events of book three were going to happen during book one or two?" Which you've kind of answered, but if you want to repeat that.
Oh, yeah, I've known what's happening. I'm a I'm assuming this is referring to a couple of key events in book 3. I've known that that's happened the entire time, before
But that's
anyone's
what's
read the
great,
book.
right? Because you can do all the foreshadowing ahead of time, right? And you can have that
Yeah,
going.
I've known what the last sentence of the last book has been since before I finished A Broken Blade.
Oh, I love that.
It's
That's awesome.
I'm like that much of a plotter.
Okay, I'm pretty much a plotter, but not that good. No, not quite that good. All right, let's see. Here's one by T. Ackerman. Says, when you came up with the original concept for this series, how did you decide where to split the story arc of the first book into the second into the third? Did you plan it out in advance or determine after you finished your draft for A Broken Blade? Basically, how did you know where to cut those to divide the
I mean,
story?
based on how the second book went, I didn't know. Um, second books are not always fun, y'all. Uh,
They're
A Broken
hard.
Blade so in my head when I plotted things out, because this is interesting because I was originally self-published. So my
Right.
self-publishing time was A Broken Blade was gonna come out, and then a prequel that has a name, but I'm not gonna say what it is, was gonna come out. And then what ended up being a Shadow Crown was gonna come out, then A Vicious
Mhm.
Game and um, so A Shadow Crown was always the middle, and then I kind
Right.
of saw A Blade and, the prequel kind of being, like, the act 1 of Kira's story. Um, and they were actually the same book at one point. Like, when I originally started drafting, I had, like, 185,000 words
Oh,
of the
wow.
book, like,
Mhm,
the
mhm.
flashbacks were the entire story, and then I just realized, "Oh, this story is too fun to tell, it's gotta be its own prequel." So I
Right.
separated it out. And then I always knew really well what was happening in books 3 and 4, because that's when another cast like, when all the characters were coming together and I could
Mhm.
map it out. A Shadow Crown in my original plan, I had mapped pretty well.
Yeah.
Uh, when I went trad and we decided to change the release, I was too new of an author at the time to realize how much that would change my plan when I
Oh,
agreed to do the second book before the prequel. Um, so A Shadow Crown changed a lot. A
right.
lot. And thankfully,
Once
we're
you
keep things on track for 3 and 4, but, like, I cut out a whole subplot and, like, 2 very important characters that are now cut out of the prequel, because
yeah.
of that, and it's just one of those
That's what
reality.
happens when you start spending longer time with characters, they kind of take you in a different direction. You're like, "Oh, wait a second. that's not as important as this, so now I need to, like, rework all of this part, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it was a little bit of that. It was also, you don't get to see a lot of characters in book 1 because it's all told from Kira's point of view, and she
Right.
spends so much time with, like, Riven and Sierra and Nikolai, and then I guess a little bit with Killian, but you
Mhm.
don't really get to see a lot of the shades, so it was like the prequel was how you were going to develop this relationship with the
Right.
shades, and everyone was gonna be in book 2, and then it didn't make sense to be released, so I like, it was a very different book, that's all I will say. It was so different.
It can get complicated, that's
Yeah,
okay.
it was.
Okay.
I rewrote that book 3 times. It was in 8 months.
Okay,
It was a very stressful 8 months.
that hurts my heart for you.
Lots of edits.
Oh, goodness. Okay, here's one from Tara Lloyd. She says, who was your favorite character write and the hardest part of writing? Maybe the hardest part of writing that character, I think is what she means.
Oh, okay. Or maybe the hardest character to write?
Yeah.
Because the ones that are easy to write aren't hard to write. Gerarda is my favorite. She's not the easiest to write, though. That's Nikolai's dialogue. Um, and weirdly, Sierra comes really easily too.
Mhm.
Um, but Gerard is my fave. And if you've read book 3, that won't sound as weird anymore because I know people didn't like her in the first 2 books, but she's my fave. Um, and then the hardest character, right? Riven can be hard sometimes.
Mhm.
Um, and then Kira gives me a lot of trouble sometimes, but that's because Kira is very different from me.
Mhm.
Um, I'm very much more like Riven, so sometimes it's hard when you're writing opposite to what you want
It's
her.
it's hard to write characters, I think, that are opposite of you. I wrote the heroine of book 2 in one of my series was an introvert, like a complete introvert who had anxiety, being in crowds and stuff like this, and that's not really my personality, but so I had to actually go to someone I knew really close. It's like, "Okay, how would you react in this situation? Like, how would you feel?" And like, like I had to do some research on like, really, how does that feel like when this happens, and it's funny how it's like you have to rethink everything that you're writing because not every heroine obviously is the same and every hero. So
Mhm.
that's really cool. That's really cool. Um, okay, I'm gonna do one more here, and then I'm gonna ask you some of the questions from our guests that have posted up. What
Okay, so
inspired Riven and Kieran's personalities?
and Kira or Killian?
It
Sorry.
says Riven and Kieran's personalities, and that was by Callie.
Okay, I'm gonna assume Kira for that one.
Yeah, they
Uh,
might have.
I mean, Kira, I did the most work in doing her character. Like, I worked with sensitivity readers. I talked to people who had struggled with addiction, but also alcoholics. I
Right.
really worked like what it meant to be guarded if you were going to be in this like highly individual position, but also still like Kira's alcoholism in some ways is kind of medicinal to like cover the guilt she feels. So that was an interesting dynamic to kind of sort through and
Right.
how that would affect her versus what other people's paths and experiences with addiction had been,
Hmm.
and make that feel real, but also like it wasn't, um, you know, portraying that in an insensitive or inaccurate way. So
Right.
that is what framed a lot of Kira's personality is like, okay, you have this person who is good at a lot of stuff and does have power and can get easily aggravated and wants things to go her own way, often because she's protecting people, so she gets a little snippy, but also she feels deep, deep, deep guilt and has a lot of self-hate for that, and what does that
Right.
kind of mix into? And then Riven was a bit easier because Riven thinks a lot like me. Inside, you don't really get his perspective, but like Riven's much more internal. He tries to be a lot more logical. It gets in trouble sometimes. He's not as communicative as he could be.
Right.
Um, but he's like hyper loyal. And that was just to kind of, in some ways, like who would be the most annoying character to Kira, but also grow to someone that she would probably trust the most.
Yeah, that you would need almost, kind of balance it out,
Yeah,
right?
and then it just ended up being those character traits, which then made it so much easier for me to understand Riven because it much more aligned with, like, who I am.
Right.
But yeah, that's where the inspiration Riven was more built around Kira, and then Kira took a lot of work.
I love that. Okay, we're gonna ask from Hannah Moore, who's in the group here with us. She says, "I will weep when the series ends." Do you have any other books and series swirling
Will
around in
we?
your mind?
Um, I'm sorry when the 4th book comes out, Hannah. Uh, um, I'm other stuff that's coming out, I mean,
Yes. Any other things you're thinking about? And you don't have to give like,
yeah, no, I've
details, but
had some
any
stuff
ideas?
that I've talked about. So I do have the prequel that's kind of under contract, kind of not. It's one of those like weird, like I have a second unnamed book contract, so it could be whatever I want it to be sort of thing. Uh,
Right.
I do have the prequel. I am hoping to put that out. My publisher seems to be excited about it. And then I'm also coming out with sapphic romances. The first one comes out in November. And I'm self-pubbing those because I'm gonna move hybrid. And
Fun.
yeah, and then there are other books. The first book is called Cherry Picker. There are two other books in the series, and they will come out really quick. So it'll kind of be Cherry Picker, and then book four, the Halfling Saga in January, and then two other sapphic romances. And
Yes.
then maybe
So
something
so don't
else.
cry, Hannah. There's more coming, okay?
Yeah, don't worry. Well, I
It's
mean,
gonna
the
be
romances shouldn't really make you cry, at least not in the way that the Halfling Saga makes you cry.
Yeah, I think she means that she's gonna miss these characters and,
Oh,
which I can
oh,
understand. She's gonna weep when it ends just
we'll
because she can't
definitely
read it
miss.
anymore. But she can reread, of course.
Yes, absolutely, and there might be a prequel.
Right. All right, we have one, from Ashanti Morgan. How do you develop and flesh out your characters? Do you draw from real life experiences or do you just create them from scratch?
Oh, that's interesting. I do draw from real life experiences, but it's never, like, at the character level. Like, I'm never, like, being like, "Oh, I really wanna write a character who's like this person I used to work with or this person I used to go to school with." It never happens that way. I usually get my ideas centered around, like, one moment that I find really interesting. Like, for A Broken Blade, it was, um, having I had always had this idea of 2 girls being at what I thought at the time was a residential school, but some sort of, like, institution, and then
Mhm.
I kind of got this picture of one of them writing names into her skin in some sort
Ooh,
of, like, revenge idea, and
wow.
that kind of sparked A Broken Blade, and then on top of that, I put all the layers of themes that I wanted to build into the story. So I usually start with, like, maybe one key, very visceral, very visual scene,
Mhm.
and I don't even know who the characters are, and I find it intriguing, and then I build themes around that, and then the characters develop, but it's never like, "Oh, I want this type of person." And then even with the romances I wrote, it was a similar thing. I had, like, one scene of inspiration, I was like, "Oh, this seems interesting. These 2 people could seem interesting. What are the 2 women that would be involved in this?"
Right.
Exploring the themes that I want to do romantically and, like, the representation I want to give, and then kinda worked backwards. I don't start with character work and move up.
That's so that's fascinating. I tend to do the opposite. I tend to start with the characters. I mean, I have an idea obviously for the world and the world building and stuff like that, and then things start to happen. So it's really I love it's very interesting to me to hear other authors and how they work and that's very cool.
I would love to, like, get a spark for a character like that because I feel like you must have a much stronger sense of what you're doing in your first draft than I
Oh,
do.
I don't know. I don't know, maybe, maybe not. Maybe I I don't know if it's right or wrong. It's just like what works, how my brain works, you know? And I tend
Yeah,
to it's so funny how you talked about Kira and just like her balancing and personalities and stuff like that. I tend to always pick opposites. I don't know why in my couples, like just feel like it's more fun to write opposite personalities, you know?
play off of each other so well. Like, so
Yes, it makes the dialogue so fun, right?
so fun. It also makes it, like, even at a mechanical level, it also makes it so much easier because you know
Oh, yeah.
immediately saying what.
I
because
know.
that gets tricky when you have, like I loved writing romances for that reason. It was so
Yeah.
refreshing because I never ran into the problem of having 7 characters in a room at the same time and needing to talk things out. It was like, I think the most characters I have at one time is 4, and I'm like, "This is I love this. I could do this
Oh,
all the time."
yeah. I agree. I have this so in the final scene of my Stay a Spell series that has 6 sisters, they're all with their couples and now they've had children. The final scene has the entire family. It's like a second epilogue, futuristic epilogue, and they're all in the hospital, they're there for the birth of one of the sisters' children. But I was like, why did I do this to myself? How am I possibly going to describe all of these people and what they're doing and what's happening?
Right?
It's like,
And then
yeah.
people always,
Very
like, don't
difficult.
notice those scenes, or they're
Oh,
like, "Oh, they're so short," and it's like, you have no idea how long
how
it takes to
how
write
hard this was. This is painful. Please appreciate it.
Yeah,
Like you said, if there's more than 4 people, everybody needs to applause, please.
yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, so, we have another one from Ashanti. She asks, "Are there any recurring motifs or symbols in your work that hold personal significance for you?" I like that one.
Recurring motifs.
Or symbols that might mean something to you personally.
Oh, symbols, yeah. A lot of this, symbol and culture stuff that I pull in the Halfling Saga is, like, directly pulled from my culture.
Right.
Um, it's not exactly the same because I didn't wanna, like, appropriate my culture's own teachings, but you can, like if you're well-versed in Anishinaabe culture, you can very
Mhm.
much see it in the book. Um, and then I could definitely see those repeating just because that's so much of how I view life that it's kinda like second nature. And then, like, motifs or themes, I mean, I have to say I love love stories,
Yeah.
um, but I don't always love romances, like, I love a tragic ending, and I have a feeling my
Ugh.
romances will be true romances, I promise, but I have a feeling, like, a
Don't
lot of
scare
what
anyone
you
like
get
that.
from me in the
Melissa, you're gonna
future
scare people.
is gonna be bad. You should be scared. I mean, some of them are already mad at me for what goes on in book 3. Apologies.
Oh, goodness.
You can tell I'm so sorry.
I love those memes of authors where, like, the readers are, like, crying in their books, and the author's off to the side, like, gleefully laughing, like,
Right now,
maniacally.
people are sending me voice notes because 'cause they're reading, like, A Vicious Game, and they're sending me voice note reactions, which is my favorite thing. I'm not trying to discourage anyone from doing this, I love it so much, but some of them genuinely want to be upset with me and, like, want me to be, like,
To get
sad.
angry.
This is the wrong thing, this is fueling my fire, I'm just gonna make it worse in the next.
Oh gosh. Alright, good luck, y'all. In the last book. Sarah Keel also asks, "What happened to the religion in Elverath? In book 1, Kira and the Shadow fight in an abandoned temple, and it made me curious."
Hmm. I mean, there's 2 kind of answers to this. Um, 1 is this is part of the abandoned plot line that got cut out of book 2.
Gotcha.
2, it does make a bit like, I do explain it in well, I explain a tiny little bit of it in book 3, and then it does get explained in book 4. But that is like, this is the thing, if you go back and read A Broken Blade, there are a few threads that you might be able to catch
Mhm.
that were very much set up for this whole other half of a Shadow Crown that has will never get to see the light of day, and that just happens to be one of the things. It's one of
Yeah.
the dropped
Gotcha.
threads.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
know
I'll
I've
go
got
back
this
in,
little
but
just kinda fell away. It's alright.
yeah.
We have, an anonymous attendee asks, "How do you manage to keep the twists and turns secret from friends, family, and fans?" So are you, the kind of author who tells, like, family and friends, or you just, like,
No.
keep your writing all to yourself?
No, it's the hardest thing ever, and my family's not watching, so I'll throw them right under the bus. Um, they're fans of my work, so they get angry if I tell them things, so I'm
Yeah.
not allowed to tell them things. And my family still hasn't read book 3 yet, y'all. My sister
Oh,
has had it this summer, and just with things going on in her life, she has not read it. So not only have I been keeping secrets, I've been keeping them for months longer than I really should have
right.
to, and it's really hard. It's getting to the point where I'm just threatening to tell them just to just to teach them a lesson, but I won't.
That
And
would
then
be
with
so
fans
cruel.
the fans, I just say contradicting stuff all of the time, every time people
Yeah.
ask me questions, and then they never know if I'm telling the truth or not.
Well, that'll keep them guessing at least, right?
Exactly. Or just very, very vague.
Yeah, super vague. Let's see. Ashanti asks, has another one, and this is a good one though. Will you do a book signing for the fourth installment in Toronto or anywhere? Are you going to have any book signings or anything going on this year?
Um,
Or
I mean,
do you plan to do any kind of signings?
I would love to do one in Toronto. I'd set one up. Maybe. I don't know. The Indigo side, to be honest, um, like my books just perform really better in the States, and that's where most of my readers are.
Yeah.
But yeah, anytime I'm in Toronto, I would try to set things up. The only thing, it was Ashanti who asked that question. I
Uh-huh.
personally don't like Toronto. I'm sorry if you're from there, so I try to avoid it as much as possible. But I think I might be there in fall for a conference, and I might be setting something up. But if I do, it'll be on my socials.
Gotcha.
For
Gotcha.
all the non-Americans, it's like everyone either really likes Toronto or really doesn't like it, and I'm just in the not like it camp. It's too big for me.
I haven't been to Canada. Well, no, that's not true. I went to Niagara Falls, Canada, which means I walked across, went across the bridge and saw it from
Oh,
that side and then came back. So I actually haven't really been to Canada. I really want to go though. Um, here's one from Teresa Duncan. What was your favorite part about writing this book? And I know these questions are so like hard because it's so like wide, but was there like a scene that just really like emotionally hit you, or it just made you feel good, cathartic?
I always I mean this seriously, I just laugh because I always give the, like I would be so scared to answer this on paper routinely because I would look so evil. But I really liked the funeral scene in A Vicious Escape. But for me, it was just like, I love when you get to put in hints of culture and then like
Yeah.
character growth, and then you learn so much about different characters in that scene, and it builds on something that happens in book four. So that's a very important thing. And then of course, like anything, I feel like I like to give a little like happiness with my pain. You learn what
Right.
a very important word in that scene, and I think it's very cute as well. So those are my favorite scenes where I have you crying and then going, "Aw," at the same time.
Right. Well, speaking of language, Hannah Moore asks, does the Elvish language in the Halfling Saga have any relation to a language spoken in your own culture? She says it's so well written and believable as a language on the page.
That's because it's a full language. I am a linguist, so I do have,
Yeah, I was
like
about to say, y'all did hear the bio, right?
I think I have a full 8,000 words of that language. Um, yeah, and it does some of the root forms, yeah, do come from Anishinaabe.
Mhm,
So, like, Equinera comes from, like, Kwe
mhm.
in Anishinaabe. It has a different meaning in Elvish than it does in Anishinaabe, and there's other like root forms that I did take in cases, but like the the Elvish language has its own syntax, it has its own grammar. I actively use past and present and future and conditional tense in it. Like it doesn't you would never know that, but I know that.
Right. So this is really interesting for me because I'm writing a book where I'm having to do quite a bit of research. So you use a lot of your own prior knowledge as a linguistics expert, and your own culture. Was there research you had to do that you found interesting or anything cool that you had to do on your own to discover to add to the story? That's for
I
me, by the way.
Yeah, I did a lot of research on like addiction. That was the biggest, like I spent the
Right,
most time in interviews. I talked to people, I had sensitivity readers. I talked to healthcare professionals who help people out of addiction.
right,
Um, I also like looked into a lot of like conventions around elves and fae and how they've been portrayed in fantasy. And tried to pull that as much as I can, but I also take creative license to kind of play with themes. But I did want to make like the point of this was to make it familiar to fantasy romance readers who read
right,
it. So I didn't want to step too far out of the box. So I
right.
did look at a lot of lore and even the decisions around the language. I did craft a whole language, but I did strategically make it sound similar to other, like, elvish languages that
Right.
are just in fantasy, so it has, like, a kinda lilt to it, it's got this soft sound apart from for the most part, in the continental language, and then the Fractured Isles, where Gerard is from, has a bit of a harder sound to it, more Q's and K's in it.
I love
Um,
that.
yeah, I can go on and on
See, I
about
love language too. I think that's so cool. I love that.
yeah, never give an author a a linguistics degree, or we will just make languages for the fun of it.
Exactly.
It will
So
happen.
I don't have a linguistics degree, but when I'm creating like characters from different, in my different worlds or whatever, I'm like, well, this is a harder culture, more so I always I'll go and look up, old like Germanic or Norse names, like to try to find like the names that would fit them, it's just interesting. I love that. I wish I had all your knowledge because that would make things a lot easier for me,
Yeah,
linguistically.
I mean, to a point, and then you get obsessed with it, and then you're spending
Yeah,
all of your time building out a language that is never gonna see the
right.
light of
Then you're
day.
going down a rabbit hole, right? A rabbit hole you
Yes,
don't need to go, right?
actually doing drafts, so you can procrastinate if you if you let yourself go too
We can do that easily enough, right? Just with
yeah.
anything.
Oh, with Google searches, like, that's the thing with people asking about research, it's like, well, I've definitely gone down like, the amount of time I can't even remember the word now, it's so annoying, but in castles where they go like this, the amount of time I spent trying to find out what the word for that space was, I was
Yeah,
like,
on the parapet, but I don't know what that's called either.
yeah,
Um,
it's in the book, it is it is in, Broken Blade, I use it, I
wow.
just can't remember off the top
Yeah,
of my
the
head,
little notch,
and
the little notch in the parapet thing.
yeah, and I spent forever, like
Trying to find
like
it.
trying to figure it out, I was, like, on ancient, like, castle sites,
Oh
like, museum
gosh.
pages, trying to find, like, old blueprints that people used in reconstructions in, like, the 18 and 1900s that might say it, and I finally found it, I think that took me 4 hours to do. Yeah,
The things
I
that
have
we
to
have to
decide
do.
first leaves and berries sometimes, and I've,
Yeah.
like, tried to find words for that, and then tried to find different words for them that might be more colloquial because people wouldn't
Right.
understand what I was saying, and then yeah, that, like,
Isn't that the
the
hard part is trying to in fantasy, is
yeah,
trying to mesh, like, something that feels real and, like, natural with, something that's foreign and not, it's a difficult thing to do.
yeah,
It's very
exactly.
difficult.
We're trying to figure out if something's an anachronism or not.
Right.
Like, so many different Google wormholes an author
Oh,
can go
yeah.
down, especially, like I don't know if you have trouble writing, but some days
Oh,
I
yeah.
will wanna do but writing. So if my brain, like, catches one of those, I'm Googling for hours sitting at
Oh,
my
yeah.
desk not writing.
Today I needed to find an ancient city of Rome, in from the ancient Roman times that was north of Rome, and so I pulled up this map on Google, and I'm like, "Oh, that's a cool place," and so I'm, like, clicking on all of them and seeing looking what the city would have been like, "Oh, there's a nice lake there, maybe I'll plot it," it's just like and then, yeah, I spent an hour just looking at ancient Roman cities, for no apparent reason.
Yeah.
Well, Melissa, this is so exciting. Big congratulations again on a vicious game.
Thank you.
And thank you for spending some time with us and everyone who's here. I did want to thank everyone for coming and those who bought a ticket that included the Barnes& and Noble exclusive copies of A Vicious Game. They will be delivered to them in 8 to 10 days. Also, additional editions of A Vicious Game are available 24/7 on barnesandnoble.com and your local Barnes& and Noble stores. So please go get a copy. And that
I
cover is
will
gorgeous.
I know I love this cover. This is I love book 4's cover too now that I've seen it, but this cover is gorgeous. I just wanna say, so people don't get too angry with me, I would recommend getting the special edition. It has an extra bonus chapter in it that you are definitely going to wanna read. I'm not gonna say what character it is, but it'll have answers to some of your questions.
You're such a tease.
I am a tease, but
So yes, you guys go
I
get
don't
that
want
special
people
edition.
finishing it at 2:30 in the morning and having no answers.
Yeah, like, "Wait, where do I get that?" Awesome, great. It was so fun visiting with you tonight. Thank you for your time, and thank you for everyone who joined us tonight, and please go check out Vicious Game at your Barnes& and Noble. Good night,
Yes,
everyone.
so much. Bye,
Yeah, you're
everyone.
welcome. Good night.